I don't think it would be wrong to describe the company as a cult of personality during those years. Hello, and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. Bottle number 53 is Seagram's Cara Mia. I'd never heard of it before, but it's a chocolate almond cream liqueur. Like the Seagram's Almondine from bottle 32, it's in a totally generic Seagram's bottle with no flair. It's like they thought they didn't even need to try. Being Seagram's was enough. In terms of dating, just like with the other Seagram's bottles I found from this period, there's a photograph of it in the archives of the Hagley Museum and Library in Delaware. This one is dated 1978. So that's a start date, and one that makes sense since the original cream liqueur Bailey's had come out in the mid-1970s, spawning dozens of copycats like this one. However, that 1978 date might just have been a concept drawing. The only other evidence I can find of Cara Mia's existence is in an article from 1985, where it was included in an article talking about new products. One amusing side note to that, the company quoted in the article is none other than Product Initiatives, who featured prominently in bottle 46, Mandalay. Anyway, let's say 1980s for this bottle. And that's about all there is to say about it, but I'm not done saying stuff about Seagram's. Clearly, a company that releases Cara Mia cream liqueur is a different kind of company than it was when we last left off their story. In the Seagram's Almondine episode, we left the Bronfman family at the end of the 40s, when they had recently released the hugely popular and carefully crafted 5 Crown and 7 Crown blended whiskeys and were reigning kings of the big four that dominated the North American market. So how do you get from there to chocolate almond cream liqueur? In the 1950s, Seagram was all about growth. As I noted in bottle 33, Captain Morgan, Seagram had already started expanding into rum in the 40s. That continued in the 50s when they picked up Myers rum and eventually turned that into a cream liqueur, see bottle 45. In 1958, they acquired Cheminot Frere brandy, and it was my tiny bottle of that, see bottle 16, that made me realize that the Seagram company was going to be a regular recurring character in this project. The 40s and 50s also saw them expand heavily into wine. They also diversified into non-beverage fields. In the 1950s, they made their first investment into oil when they purchased Frankfurt Oil in Oklahoma and followed that up in the 1960s with the purchase of the much larger Texas Pacific Coal and Oil. This kind of diversification was not unique to Seagram. Many of their competitors were making acquisitions outside their core product as well. But what was different was the extent to which those actions were taken, not necessarily for strategic reasons, but because that's what Mr. Sam wanted. Because the other thing Seagram's was all about in the 1950s and 60s was Sam Bronfman. I mentioned in my last episode about Seagram that Mr. Sam positioned himself as a power broker and cut other family members out, and that was even more so in these years. Sam was brutal in forcing family members to give up shares and rights to leadership in the company, and groomed his own sons, Charles and Edgar, to assume his mantle. I don't think it would be wrong to describe the company as a cult of personality during those years. Sam had his fingers in everything, and no decisions would be made without him, even minor ones that in other companies would just be taken care of lower down the ladder. The Seagram board was full of his cronies, and the typical meeting agenda was declare a dividend and have a drink. Seagram was something of a multi-headed hydra. Distillers Corporation Seagram Limited in Montreal was the parent company, and Joseph E. Seagram & Sons Inc. was its much larger U.S. affiliate located in New York. The company built a much-lauded skyscraper in New York City in the 50s to serve as their headquarters. The construction was overseen by Sam's daughter Phyllis, and the building was designed by famed architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. The New York Times would call it one of the city's most copied buildings. Located at 375 Park Avenue, it's still referred to as the Seagram Building today. The U.S. operation had 3 semi-autonomous subsidiaries, Seagram, Calvert, and Frankfurt, who produced their own product lines and to a certain extent competed against each other, which was fine because all the profits eventually landed in the same pot. And Sam had opinions about all of it. But he was getting older, and in 1957 officially named his younger son Edgar as his successor. Edgar took over as president and took charge of the American operation, while eldest son Charles headed up the Canadian side. But Edgar would later say he didn't have any real control over the company until at least 1963, and perhaps not the real power until Sam Bronfman's death in 1971. So what did Edgar do with that power? That will have to wait until the next time I have a boring Seagram's bottle, which I'm sure I will. Got a Seagram story to share? Drop a comment below or at My Tiny Bottles on social media. And please follow and subscribe while you're there. Visit mytinybottles.com for more on this bottle and all the bottles. Cheers!